Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Roar. Thanks for coming back and joining me again today in the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. Today, I wanted to talk about another pivot in my series called Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. But before we get started talking about today's pivot, let me start by telling you a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing, okay? I'm Greg Storch, and I am the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I focus on helping organizations create winning cultures. I'm a certified professional coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Hey, so last week I spoke about making a pivot that allows leaders to recognize and embrace the value of the differences that make us all unique and why it's important to have diverse teams. It was really a timely chat because I know over the past few years, I've heard and seen a big focus on diversity and inclusion, D&I, in the workplace. You know, oftentimes leaders fear things that are different, people who bring things to the table that aren't exactly like their way of doing things. And that's why it's important to make sure you're not stacking the deck with people who are just like you. You need to bring people who are bringing more to the table than just more of the same. All right, I've heard this quote many times throughout my career, and I think it says a lot about what last week's pivot was all about. The quote is, if you bring the same thing to the table as I do, then one of us is redundant. So that's last week's recap. If you weren't able to see the Weekly Roar last Wednesday, you could just head over to my website at lion-enterprise.com. Check out video number 80 for last week's session in the Lion's Pride library, where you can also access all of my other videos. The Lion's Pride library is free, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. Okay, let's talk about this other pivot that leaders may want to make in order to reach their full leadership potential. Today, I'm talking about our authority to lead. I want us to think into where the authority is coming from in order for us to exert influence on others, our followers. One of the most famous John Maxwell quotes we see in here is that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. But as leaders, where do we get the right to exert our influence on other people? Where is that authority to do that coming from? That's what I want to dive into today. What is it that really makes us the leader? Is it the position we hold? Is it our military rank? Is it a document that says so? Where is it that our authority really is coming from? It's pretty interesting questions, aren't they? I think it's something we really never even think about. If we're holding a position of leadership, sometimes we just assume we have the authority. But what happens when that necessarily is not the case? One of the biggest lessons we can learn as leaders is that position does not equal the authority. Titles don't magically give us the power of influence. Just because I was a corporate executive with the title of Vice President of Customer Relations doesn't mean my ability to influence others was bestowed upon me because of my title. So, one of the main things we need to understand as leaders is that authority comes in many different types. For example, you might have heard of positional authority, right? That's the authority to lead based on our title or our position within an organization. Well, let's talk about this for a second because you'll probably see why this is one of the lowest levels of authority you can actually have. I've told you about my career in IT as a corporate executive. I was leading a lot of people, but the reality was that my leadership was based on my title, my position within the company. Now, people recognized my authority because they knew positionally I was at the top of the chain, and that made me the leader. There's so many other ways that we can gain the authority to lead others. Another example is something called success authority. Remember when you were in school and at recess, it would be time to pick teams for the game? Most of the time, heck, all of the time, we always made the captain of each of the teams the person who was the proven performer, right? The best one. They were the best players of that particular sport. Their proven performance, their success gave them credibility. And that's what drove the rest of us to want to be on their team and follow them. We wanted to be a part of their success. You know, I had this happen to me when I was in the Navy back in 1995. Woo! I was selected as the Shore Sailor of the Year for the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. That was something not a lot of sailors achieved in their careers. So I was viewed as a successful sailor. So it gave me credibility. And I found that other sailors wanted to associate with me and my level of success. So that's where my authority to lead them came from. So hopefully you're getting this idea that there's a lot of ways that we can derive our authority for leading others. Maybe it's based on our natural ability to lead, natural authority, or maybe it comes from mentoring, where we derive a greater sense of influence based on our ability to develop others. One of the most common things we see, of course, is positional authority. Leaders who gain influence based on the position or the title that they hold. This is prevalent in the military as well as the civilian world. You see it all over. Now, as I mentioned, positional authority is one of the loosest levels of authority from where we can derive our influence. But on the other end of the authority spectrum, the highest level is what is known as moral authority. And that's what we're talking about today. Have you ever heard of that? Moral authority? You probably have because it's actually used quite a lot. But do you know what it really means? I've got to be honest. I've heard it plenty. I've heard the term used before, moral authority, but I never really thought into it. I never really got my arms around what the heck that authority is all about. So we're going to talk about this today because this is the pivot that I want you to consider making. Think into where your authority might be coming from now in your current leadership position. How are you able to influence others? Is it because of your job title or position? If so, How do you move away from what I would call a superficial authority and turn towards a more concrete authority as a leader? How do you pivot to do that? Before we even get into that, I want to make sure you understand this authority. What the heck is moral authority? The best way that I can describe it is it's leadership influence that comes from who we are as a person rather than the position we hold. Now, that's a very simple description, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that really means. Actually, more than any other type of authority to lead, this authority is the biggest one. And the way a person develops moral authority, yes, it can be developed, is by consistently walking the walk and talking the talk. It comes from being authentic. Whew. So those are two really important words right there: consistency and authenticity. You see, moral authority is gathered over our lifetime. Now, the tricky thing is that having this type of authority isn't in our control. It doesn't matter how much we do to gain moral authority, because it's actually given to us by others who see us as living a life of consistent authenticity. You know, that's easier said than done. And that's why this is considered the highest authority that we can get to influence others. It comes from things like our values and our ability to fill the role as an inspiration to others. See, at the end of the day, people are looking to follow people. They don't want to follow a position. There is absolutely nothing that can fill the void if you're deficient in moral authority. It doesn't matter how much money you have, what your title calls you, how good you are at your job, how educated you are. Nothing, none of that. Having moral authority makes it easy for leaders to touch a person's heart before they ask for their hand. Now, I hope I'm painting a good picture for you of what moral authority really is. But I want to make sure that I don't leave you with the impression that moral authority is something that mere mortals can never achieve. You can definitely pivot from where you are now and start working on establishing influence based in moral authority. You know, this can sound really pie in the sky, but if you're interested in making this pivot towards obtaining moral authority, I'm going to share the 4 C's with you that's going to help you spin on that one foot and pivot towards a new leadership authority. And that's the authority to influence based on the person you really are. Okay, so let's talk about the first C. The first C stands for competence. Now, I'm starting with this one for a reason. It's a must for any leader. You have to have the ability to lead well. Look, I'm going to put this simply. You have to be able to do your job as a leader. I know that sounds simple, but how many managers do you know or have you heard of who are terrible leaders? They were promoted into their positions for every reason other than the fact that they can actually lead other people. It's a real problem, and it costs companies tons of money every year because of it. Here's the key. Authority is not something we possess. It isn't something we can buy. It can't even be assigned to us by a superior. What we first need to understand about the authority is that the authority to lead others is actually given to us by the very people we're trying to lead. We have to earn it. Leaders have to prove themselves worthy of it. And whether we are worthy of it or not is all in the hands of our potential followers. Okay, so if you think you need to make this pivot, you should be thinking into how you can develop or establish your competence as a leader. So first of all, be consistent in always giving your best effort, regardless of the task at hand. When I was a young officer in the Navy, one of my senior officers who wrote my evaluations wrote a comment, and that comment has stuck with me ever since the day that I read it. And what it said was, Lieutenant Storch can always be depended on to provide exceptional results regardless of the task assigned. That, my friends, is a perfect example of developing or showing competence. All right, so the next C, the second C, is courage. Every time I say that word, I get the image in my head of the cowardly lion from The Wizard of Oz. He just wanted some courage, right? So what comes to mind when I say the word courage? What's coming up for you when you hear that word? Do you think of the word brave? Courage is simply our ability as leaders to move forward in spite of our fears. Think about how important courage is to establishing moral authority. When others are seeing you face adversity with courage, you develop the authority to influence them. Your courage in difficult situations is a source of encouragement to those who follow you. People naturally get it. They know and they admire everything courage is and everything courage represents. It's an admirable quality for a leader. Nothing inspires people more to be their best than seeing a leader who steps up in the face of adversity, large or small, and is willing to show courage despite their fears when everyone else stands frozen by it. So courage is another mandatory ingredient in the development of your moral authority. Okay? The third C you should look for in yourself and develop is consistency. Consistency is the attribute of leaders that gives them the ability to do well all the time, not just some of the time. Consistency sends a message of dependability to your followers. It's kind of a what you see is what you get. Your followers know what they're getting because you're consistent. So, what does consistency have to do with developing a moral authority? A lot. And I'm not just talking about consistency in word and deed. It also means consistency in our values too. We can achieve consistency as leaders when we're able to align our convictions with our behaviors. What the what? Let me say that again. Consistency is achieved when we align our convictions to our behaviors. I hope you wrote that one down. Our followers those we want to influence, have to see that there are never any discrepancies between what we say and what we do. This is why I really dislike the saying, do as I say, not as I do. Saying that as a leader sends a terrible message to our followers, and it certainly degrades any chance we have to establish our moral authority. If we want to develop the moral authority to influence others, there can be no doubt between who we claim to be and who we truly are. What we believe and what we do. This is what I mean when I talk about consistency as it relates to the development of our moral authority. Consistency is also what develops our reputation. It's how we become known. Let me share this story with you. I was a dental equipment repairman for about 10 years in the Navy. I installed and I fixed dental equipment for a living. I worked in a repair shop in San Diego, and I was stationed at that shop for 5 years. During that time, I was able to develop a good service reputation. The local Navy dental clinics always requested me to support their needs, regardless of the repairman who was assigned to service the clinic. Why? Because they knew what they would get from me. I had developed a good service reputation, and I did it, that's right, by being consistent. So consistency definitely plays a major role in developing your reputation. The other thing I wanted to say about being consistent is that it lets other people know where you stand. It takes the guesswork out of it. And when you're a leader, that's a great attribute to have. You don't want your people guessing what your expectations are. They should know, and they should know from the consistency in your own behaviors and your own values. When you're consistent, what you're really doing is displaying your expectations for others to see. Okay, so there is one last ingredient to this moral authority recipe. The last thing you have to add, the fourth C, character. Yeah, you can watch the evening news for about 2 seconds to find every bad example of what I'm going to talk about right now. We struggle today to find leaders based on moral authority because they don't have any. And here's why. They lack this ingredient. And the lack of that ingredient is one of the main reasons we don't see leaders with moral authority today. A lot of leadership and our ability to develop moral authority comes from not only what people see, but also from what happens behind closed doors. You know where I'm going with this. It's what we do as leaders when no one is looking. I know you know that sounds familiar. Nothing undermines our authority more than when there's a disconnect between how we conduct ourselves in public and how we conduct ourselves in private. There you have it. Turn on the news and there will be a perfect example of what not to do. Having strong character as a leader means that these two things are in alignment always. You've probably heard it before, the definition of integrity, right? Doing the right thing even when nobody is looking. Integrity is a big part of our character, and it comes from the alignment of our actions to our values. And as much as integrity plays a part in our character, so does our authenticity. People want to follow leaders who are who they say they are. Leaders who are honest, Sometimes it's a real struggle to be authentic for leaders because we sometimes feel like we need to be what we think our followers need us to be. But what they need us to be is everything I just spoke about. They need us to just be who we really are. As leaders, we shouldn't be afraid of authenticity if we're doing the right things for the right reasons, following the right values, and taking the right actions. When we do that, our followers will be the ones who determine our moral authority, and our consistency will make it perfectly clear to them. So don't fear being who you are. Be authentic. All right, so those are the 4 C's. I want to do a wrap up here. I'm talking about making this pivot towards developing our moral authority, which is the highest authority we can have when it comes to gaining influence over others. Now, if you're a leader whose influence is given under the authority of something else, like positional authority, and you want to pivot to an authority that will trump all others, then there are 4 areas you can develop to help you pivot and again gain moral authority. I talked about the importance of being competent as a leader, our ability to lead well. I also mentioned the need to have courage, the ability to push forward in the face of fear when others would normally cower. I touched on how being consistent was a vital ingredient to developing moral authority, and that we needed to do well all the time, not just some of the time. Leading is hard, and maintaining consistency is challenging. You have to work at it every day. But if you do, soon you'll find that it matures your ability to remain consistent. What your followers see is what they get. And then finally, I mentioned the 4th C, and that was character, and why it's important for us to not only do the right things when people are watching, but probably more important is doing the right thing when nobody is watching. That's the true test of someone's character, when they can do the right thing when nobody is around to see it. The last thing I want to remind you about is that while you have these 4 necessary ingredients to develop moral authority that gives you the authority over the influence of others, the best thing you can do is just continually work at each one of those 4 things. Keep striving to establish your moral authority. But at the end of the day, moral authority isn't something we achieve on our own accord. It isn't delegated to us by a higher authority. No, at the end of the day, our moral authority as leaders, it will be given to us by our followers. The cool thing about making this pivot is that it is surely going to increase your influence on others. And not only will it help you get buy-in from your own followers now, but it's going to stretch beyond your circle of influence and start to impact those who aren't under your formal leadership right now. When you develop the ability to influence at this level under moral authority, the sky is the limit. Okay, everybody, there's another pivot for you to consider from inevitable change, making pivots in your leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in for the weekly roar. I appreciate you more than words can say. Hey, just as a friendly reminder, before we sign off, please help me influence other leaders and help them grow by sharing out the link to the weekly roar video that I'm going to post in the Lion's Den after this watch party's over. Remember, the watch party link doesn't stay active for replay, so don't share that one. I'm going to be back here next week in the Lion's Den speaking about another pivot that we can make in our own leadership. Next week, I want to talk to you about the importance for leaders to take their leadership to the next level. And I'm talking about transforming our leadership. I'll be describing the pivot that takes us from leaders who know how to lead to leaders who know why they lead. This is going to be good. I hope you're going to join me next week. Okay, everybody, until we meet again, remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.